Why do we constantly mistake the temporary relief of paying off a credit card for actual financial progress? You know the exact feeling I'm talking about. You sit down at your computer, log into your banking portal, and see that terrifying balance staring back at you. You take a deep breath, transfer the funds from your checking account, and watch that number drop to zero. A massive wave of relief washes over you. You feel responsible. You feel in control. You feel like you're finally getting ahead in the game of wealth. But a few months later, you find yourself staring at that exact same balance, feeling that exact same anxiety, and wondering how you ended up back at square one. Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you will completely change how you see your daily financial decisions. You're caught in an invisible emotional loop that the modern banking system relies on to keep you poor. We live in a society that's masterfully engineered our financial tools to trigger the reward centers of our ancient brains. When you pay off a debt, your brain registers the elimination of a threat. It gives you a chemical reward. But that chemical reward is a lie. It's a biological illusion that masks the reality of your financial stagnation. You're not broken. You're not bad with money. Your brain is just executing a survival program that's entirely mismatched for the modern economic reality. For thousands of years, our ancestors survived by neutralizing immediate threats. If a predator was in the bushes, the brain demanded immediate action to eliminate the danger. Once the danger was gone, the brain flooded the body with dopamine and endorphins to signal that the organism was safe. Our modern predator isn't a tiger. It's a high-interest credit card balance, and our brains react the exact same way. Here's what nobody tells you about the psychology of debt and relief. The financial industry understands your neurochemistry better than you do. They know that the pain of seeing a high balance creates acute psychological stress. They also know that the act of paying it down creates a profound sense of emotional release. This creates a deeply addictive cycle. You accumulate debt, you feel the stress, you pay it down, and you feel the high of the relief. You mistake this emotional roller coaster for financial momentum, but you aren't moving forward. You're just running in a hamster wheel, confusing the exhaustion of the sprint with actual distance traveled. Think about how you measure financial success. Most people measure it by the absence of immediate disaster. If the rent is paid, the car loan is current, and the credit card is zeroed out, we tell ourselves we're doing great. But the absence of disaster isn't the presence of wealth. The relief you feel when you pay off a balance is just your brain celebrating that you're no longer drowning. But treading water isn't the same thing as swimming toward the shore. The banking industry profits immensely from keeping you in this state of perpetual treading. The trap is incredibly subtle. Every time you wipe out a balance, you reinforce the behavior that caused the balance in the first place. Your brain associates the credit card with the positive feeling of relief rather than the negative feeling of the original purchase. This is a classic behavioral loophole. We convince ourselves that we're disciplined because we always pay our debts. We wear our ability to clear a balance as a badge of honor. But true financial progress is quiet. It's boring. It doesn't provide the massive dopamine spikes of clearing a sudden crisis. This brings us to a fundamental misunderstanding of what wealth actually feels like. Wealth building is rarely accompanied by sudden waves of relief. When you automate an investment into an index fund, there isn't any immediate emotional payoff. There isn't a threat being neutralized. In fact, locking your money away for 30 years often feels like a loss to your primitive brain. You're giving up immediate purchasing power for a theoretical future benefit. The brain hates this. It wants the immediate feedback loop of clearing a red number from a screen. So we prioritize the short-term relief over the long-term compounding. We put all of our energy into fighting fires instead of building fireproof structures. And because we're expending so much effort, we genuinely believe we're making progress. But motion isn't action, and relief isn't wealth. We've got to separate the emotional sensation of safety from the mathematical reality of net worth. If you're spending your entire adult life simply clearing the slate every month, you're playing the game exactly how the system designed you to play it. To break this cycle, you must stop trusting your emotional responses to money. The feelings of anxiety and relief are biological traps designed to keep you focused on the immediate present. You've got to understand that your willpower is entirely useless against millions of years of evolutionary programming. Willpower will always surrender to the desire for emotional equilibrium. The only way to escape the illusion of progress is to dismantle the environment that creates the illusion in the first place. We're going to look under the hood of your financial psychology and rewire the connection between action and reward. To understand why you're caught in this exhausting loop, we need to look at the biological reality of your brain. You're operating hardware designed for the Pleistocene era, but navigating a 21st century financial ecosystem. The modern world is filled with abstract concepts like compound interest, amortization schedules, and revolving credit. Your brain doesn't naturally understand any of these things. It understands food, predators, and immediate survival. When you feel ashamed about your financial habits, you're blaming yourself for a biological mismatch you didn't choose and you simply can't control. Let's examine what happens inside your body when you look at a massive credit card bill. Your brain doesn't see a math problem on a screen. It sees a severe, immediate threat to your life. Your amygdala instantly floods your nervous system with cortisol and adrenaline. This is the exact same chemical response that kept your ancestors alive when they were being hunted in the wild. Your focus narrows entirely on the immediate danger. In this state of physiological panic, long-term financial planning isn't just difficult, it's biologically impossible. You've probably spent years beating yourself up for not having enough discipline. You tell yourself that if you just tried harder, you could save money and eliminate debt simultaneously. But this is where we must talk about willpower depletion. Your ability to make rational, disciplined choices resides in your prefrontal cortex. Every time you force yourself to do something uncomfortable or resist a purchase, you burn through the physical energy that powers this part of your brain. By evening, your willpower reserve is completely empty. This brings us to a crucial behavioral economics concept known as mental accounting. Behavioral economists at the University of Chicago found that human beings don't treat money as fluid or interchangeable. Instead, we place different dollars into distinct mental folders based on their source or purpose. When you're stressed about debt, your brain creates a massive flashing red folder labeled immediate danger. All your cognitive energy is directed toward neutralizing the threat in that specific folder, completely ignoring the larger picture of your overall net worth. This isn't just a fascinating psychological theory. Research from Stanford's Graduate School of Business has clearly demonstrated how acute financial stress fundamentally alters human cognition. The researchers found that the constant background anxiety of managing debt literally drops your effective IQ. It consumes so much of your cognitive bandwidth that you've got significantly less mental processing power available for your career, your relationships, and your strategic thinking. The stress makes you temporarily less capable of solving the exact problems that keep you in debt. The academic term for this terrifying phenomenon is tunneling. When you're tunneled in on clearing a credit card balance just to get that hit of emotional relief, you can't see the opportunity cost. You can't see the matching retirement contribution you're missing out on. You can't see the emergency fund you failed to build. You only see the predator directly in front of you, and you only want the chemical relief of its temporary absence. The modern economic machine understands this tunneling effect perfectly. The entire consumer credit industry is engineered from the ground up to exploit it. Credit card companies design their statements and their minimum payment algorithms to keep you permanently trapped in the tunnel. They want the threat to be just scary enough to force a payment, but not so overwhelming that you declare bankruptcy and give up entirely. They're expertly managing your biological stress levels to maximize their quarterly profit margins. Let that dark reality sink in for a moment. The relief you feel when you make that monthly payment is entirely manufactured. The banking system has successfully gamified your ancient survival instincts. They sell you the poison in the form of frictionless spending and instant gratification, and then they rent you the temporary antidote at 20% interest. You feel like you're taking responsible action when the balance goes down, but you're actually just playing a highly choreographed role in their revenue model. You aren't fighting a lack of personal character or a broken moral compass. You're fighting armies of data engineers and behavioral scientists whose entire professional existence is dedicated to keeping your brain chemically addicted to the cycle of borrowing and paying back. Blaming yourself for falling into this trap is exactly like blaming yourself for getting wet when you walk into a hurricane. To win this game, we've got to stop trying to be stronger than our own biology and start building systems that bypass our flawed decision-making entirely. Let us dive deeper into the specific behavior that keeps you trapped in this cycle. I call it the illusion of action, and it's one of the most insidious psychological traps in modern personal finance. When you're feeling anxious about your money, your brain demands that you do something to alleviate that discomfort. So you log into your banking app, you check your checking account, you look at your credit card balance, you move $50 from your savings to your checking to cover an upcoming bill. You're clicking buttons, analyzing numbers, and engaging with your money. To your brain, this feels exactly like taking responsibility. It feels like you're managing your finances, but in reality, you're just rearranging the deck chairs on a sinking ship. This constant monitoring and micromanaging creates a massive false sense of control. You confuse the act of observation with the act of progression. It's like stepping on a bathroom scale 10 times a day and believing that the act of weighing yourself is the exact same thing as exercising. Your financial anxiety forces you into a state of hypervigilance, where you believe that if you just keep your eyes glued to your accounts, disaster won't strike. But this hypervigilance is utterly exhausting. It drains your daily reservoir of mental energy, leaving you completely vulnerable to impulsive decisions later in the day. A fascinating study from MIT demonstrated exactly how dangerous this behavior is for your long-term wealth. Researchers analyzed the habits of thousands of individual investors and banking customers, tracking how often they logged into their accounts to check their balances or portfolio performance. The results were shocking but entirely predictable to behavioral economists. The individuals who checked their accounts the most frequently actually had the worst financial outcomes. They saved less, they traded more impulsively, and they consistently underperformed the people who rarely looked at their accounts at all. The researchers discovered that frequent monitoring triggers a psychological phenomenon known as action bias. When human beings are faced with uncertainty or anxiety, we have an overwhelming urge to take action, even if that action is counterproductive or entirely useless. The pain of doing nothing feels absolutely intolerable. So the frequent checkers in the MIT study were constantly reacting to minor fluctuations. They'd see a drop in their balance and immediately cut a check to a credit card to soothe their anxiety, completely ignoring their broader strategic goals. They were acting on emotion, not mathematics. This is where the concept of cognitive dissonance enters the picture. Cognitive dissonance is the psychological pain you feel when your beliefs don't match your reality. You believe you're a responsible adult who should be building wealth, but your reality is a mountain of consumer debt and a stagnant savings account. To resolve this painful internal conflict, your brain desperately seeks a quick victory. It needs a tangible action to prove to itself that it's still in control. So you make an unplanned, reactive payment to a credit card just to feel like you're doing something. The moment you make that payment, the cognitive dissonance vanishes. Your brain floods your system with dopamine. You've proved to yourself that you're taking action. But the math tells a completely different story. You might have just paid $200 toward a balance that is simultaneously accumulating $250 in interest. The mathematical reality is that you're moving backward, but the psychological reality is that you feel victorious. The financial industry relies entirely on this exact disconnect. They want you to feel the victory of the battle while entirely missing the fact that you're losing the war. This illusion of action bleeds into how we spend our money as well. Think about the psychological thrill of catching a massive sale. You buy a $1,000 television that has been marked down by 30%. Your brain categorizes this transaction not as spending $700, but as saving $300. The act of capturing the discount feels like a positive financial action. You feel a massive sense of relief and accomplishment because you outsmarted the system. But your net worth just decreased by $700. You took an action that felt like saving, but was mathematically identical to losing wealth. How do we protect ourselves from a brain that constantly lies to us about what progress looks like? The answer is incredibly counterintuitive. True financial progress requires a level of passivity that will feel deeply uncomfortable to your primitive brain. You've got to decouple your emotional need for action from your financial architecture. You must stop relying on the daily dopamine hits of checking balances and moving tiny amounts of money around. You have to accept that building wealth isn't a daily activity. It's a silent, boring background process. The only way to achieve this is through the strategic application of friction. Right now, your financial environment is entirely frictionless. You can open an app, see a terrifying number, and transfer money in 3 seconds using biometric facial recognition. The banking industry removed the friction because friction stops impulsive behavior. To take back your control, you must reintroduce friction into your daily financial life. You've got to build thick walls between your emotional impulses and your bank accounts. This means deleting the banking applications from your home screen immediately. It means forcing yourself to log in on a desktop computer if you want to look at your balances. By removing the visual triggers that live in your pocket, you eliminate the constant microdoses of anxiety that drive your need for the illusion of action. You stop letting an app dictate your internal emotional state. You take the first critical step toward replacing emotional reaction with automated progression, and that's where the real magic begins. Let us examine the exact mechanism your brain uses to justify this endless cycle of borrowing and paying back. There's a powerful psychological framework at play here, known as mental accounting. As I mentioned earlier, behavioral economists at the University of Chicago discovered that humans do not treat all money equally. We compartmentalize our dollars into arbitrary mental buckets. We have a bucket for rent, a bucket for groceries, a bucket for vacation, and a bucket for debt. The problem is that these mental buckets completely distort your mathematical reality. They convince you that you are managing your money wisely when you are actually bleeding cash. Think about the classic scenario that almost everyone experiences. You have $5,000 sitting in a basic savings account. You also have $5,000 in credit card debt, accumulating 20% interest. From a purely mathematical standpoint, keeping the savings while carrying the debt is completely insane. You are essentially paying a massive premium just to look at money sitting in a bank account. Your net worth in this scenario is exactly zero. But I can guarantee that your brain does not view your net worth as zero. Your brain views you as a responsible person who has $5,000 in savings. Why does your brain lie to you like this? Because mental accounting separates the debt bucket from the savings bucket. Your primitive mind views the savings account as a vital shield against predators. It represents security, survival, and safety. The credit card debt, on the other hand, is viewed as an abstract monthly nuisance. If you were to take that $5,000 from savings and instantly wipe out the debt, your net worth would still be exactly zero. But psychologically, you would feel incredibly vulnerable. You would feel like you just lost your protective shield. So you choose to keep the debt and maintain the savings. You pay the minimums on the card every month, plus a little extra when you can. When you make those monthly payments, you feel that familiar rush of relief. You tell yourself that you are chipping away at the problem, but you are not chipping away at anything. You are actively choosing to lose money every single day in the form of compound interest, simply to protect the emotional comfort that your mental savings bucket provides. The banking industry loves mental accounting because it allows them to charge you exorbitant interest on your own money. This brings us to the psychological trap of the credit limit itself. Mental accounting tricks you into viewing your available credit as a part of your overall wealth. If you have a credit card with a $10,000 limit and a balance of $9,000, you feel a deep sense of panic. The threat is closing in. So, you work incredibly hard. You hustle, you save, and you pay that balance down to zero. You feel the massive dopamine hit of relief. But then something terrifying happens. Your brain looks at that zero balance and that $10,000 limit, and it subconsciously registers a new safety net. You do not consciously decide to go back into debt, but the mental accounting framework has shifted. You now have $10,000 of available capacity. When an emergency happens, or a stressful day occurs, or a momentary lapse in decision fatigue hits you, that empty credit card looks like a perfectly acceptable solution. You tell yourself you will just put a few $100s on it and pay it off immediately. You genuinely believe you have the discipline to handle it this time. But the trap is already sprung. You have re-entered the cycle because you viewed the cleared balance as an asset rather than a liability waiting to happen. This is exactly why willpower is completely useless against consumer debt. Willpower assumes that you are making rational choices in a vacuum, but you are not in a vacuum. You are making choices through the deeply distorted lens of mental accounting. Your brain is constantly tricking you into believing that available debt is actual money. It tells you that paying down a balance is the same thing as building wealth. It convinces you that holding onto cash while paying 20% interest is a responsible financial strategy. You cannot outsmart a brain that is literally altering your perception of reality. To break this specific part of the cycle, we have to brutally destroy your mental buckets. We have to force your brain to look at the mathematical reality of your entire financial picture. This requires creating severe friction between you and your available credit. You cannot just pay off the card and leave it sitting in your wallet. The moment the balance hits zero, you must fundamentally change your physical relationship with that piece of plastic. You have to remove it from your digital wallets, delete it from your online shopping accounts, and physically lock it away. You must stop treating debt payoff as a monthly event that you actively manage. Active management gives you that false hit of dopamine. Instead, you need to automate the destruction of your debt. You set up automatic transfers that pull the money from your checking account the exact day you get paid. You do not log in to make the payment manually. You do not give yourself the opportunity to feel the relief. You strip the emotion entirely out of the process. By automating the payment and adding massive friction to the spending, you slowly rewire your brain. You stop associating financial progress with the temporary relief of clearing a balance. You force your mental accounting system to collapse because you are no longer manually sorting dollars into different emotional buckets. You are building a cold, calculated machine that operates in the background of your life. And as we will see, this shift from emotional reaction to automated machinery is the only way to protect yourself from the most dangerous psychological threat of all. Let us look at another massive trap that keeps you stuck in this emotional roller coaster. I call it the extreme frugality trap. When you finally decide you are going to get serious about your money, what is the very first thing you do? You try to cut every single enjoyable expense out of your life. You cancel the streaming services, you swear off buying coffee, you stop eating at restaurants, and you promise yourself that you will only buy absolute necessities until your debts are paid off. You are entering a state of complete financial deprivation. In the beginning, this feels incredibly empowering. You feel like a financial warrior. Every time you walk past a coffee shop and force yourself not to go inside, you feel a surge of pride. You are taking control. You are being disciplined. You are finally doing what all the traditional financial gurus have told you to do. But you are also setting a biological time bomb inside your brain, and it is entirely guaranteed to explode. Here is what nobody tells you about extreme frugality. Every single time you force yourself to say no to a small desire, you are burning a measurable amount of physical glucose in your brain. You are actively depleting your cognitive reserves. Willpower is not a character trait that you either have or do not have. Willpower is a biological resource, and it is incredibly limited. You only wake up with a specific amount of it every single day, and every decision you make drains the tank. This brings us to the psychological mechanism known as decision fatigue. When you rely on willpower to manage your money, you are forcing yourself to make dozens of micro decisions every single day. Should I buy this? Should I pack a lunch? Can I afford to go to the movies? By forcing your brain to constantly evaluate and deny your desires, you are pushing your prefrontal cortex to the absolute point of exhaustion. Behavioral economists have studied this exact phenomenon for decades. A famous series of experiments demonstrated that people who are forced to resist eating chocolate chip cookies give up significantly faster on complex puzzles than people who are allowed to eat the cookies. The act of resisting the temptation literally drained the mental energy required to solve the puzzle. When you apply this to your daily financial life, the implications are absolutely terrifying. Think about what happens on a typical Tuesday. You wake up with full willpower. You successfully skip the premium coffee on your way to work. You eat the sad, leftover lunch you packed instead of going out with your coworkers. You resist the urge to buy a snack from the vending machine at 3 o'clock. You have been incredibly disciplined all day long, but by the time you drive home at 6 o'clock, your willpower reserve is completely empty. The tank is dry. You walk through your front door feeling exhausted, stressed, and emotionally depleted. Your brain is desperately screaming for a dopamine hit to balance out the misery of the day. You open your phone, and because your defenses are completely down, you order $50 worth of delivery food. You then spend another $100 on a random online purchase because you feel like you deserve a reward for working so hard. The mathematical reality of this scenario is brutal. You exhausted your brain to save a $5 coffee and a $15 lunch, only to blow $150 when your decision fatigue reached its peak. You traded a minor daily joy for a massive nightly failure. And the worst part is the shame that follows. You wake up the next morning, look at your bank account, and the cognitive dissonance hits you like a freight train. You feel like a total failure. You tell yourself that you are just weak. You tell yourself that you do not have the discipline required to be wealthy. But you are not broken. You are not bad with money. Your brain is just functioning exactly the way it evolved to function. You tried to fight a biological reality using sheer willpower, and biology will always win that fight. The consumer retail industry knows this perfectly. It is not an accident that the most seductive, frictionless shopping advertisements hit your social media feeds late at night when your decision fatigue is at its absolute worst. To fix this, we have to completely abandon the willpower model of money management. You must stop trying to make 50 good financial decisions every single day. It is an impossible game that you will eventually lose. Instead of relying on your exhausted brain to constantly say no, you must build a system that only requires you to make one good decision every month. You have to remove the daily friction of deprivation. The system fix is to automate your wealth building on the exact day you get paid, and then intentionally fund your small joys. If you know that a premium coffee makes your morning genuinely better, you do not use willpower to fight it. You budget for it. You give yourself a guilt-free allowance for the things that keep your dopamine levels stable throughout the day. By allowing yourself small, controlled releases of financial joy, you preserve your cognitive bandwidth for the massive decisions that actually matter. When your savings are automated and your small joys are permitted, the constant background hum of financial anxiety disappears. You are no longer spending your entire day fighting your own desires. You are no longer ending your evenings in a state of willpower depletion. You take the emotional weight completely out of the equation. You stop fighting yourself, and you finally start letting your systems do the heavy lifting. Now that we have dismantled the myth of willpower and the trap of daily frugality, we must confront the most pervasive environmental toxin in your financial life. We have to talk about how the modern economy actively weaponizes your social instincts to extract your wealth. For most of human history, your social standing was directly tied to your survival. If you were cast out of the tribe, you died. Your brain is consequently hardwired to constantly monitor your status relative to the people around you. You cannot turn this instinct off. It is baked into your neurochemistry, and the consumer economy knows exactly how to exploit it to keep you perpetually broke. Consider the trap of visible consumption. You work 40 or 50 hours a week. You are exhausted. You feel like you should be getting ahead. But when you look around, you see a world that seems to be effortlessly outperforming you. Your coworkers are driving brand new vehicles. Your friends are posting photos from expensive international vacations. Your neighbors are doing massive home renovations. You look at your own modest life, and a deep, agonizing panic sets in. You feel like you are falling behind. You feel like your hard work is entirely invisible. The paradox here is that you are only observing what people spend, never what they save. You do not see the massive credit card balances funding those vacations. You do not see the terrifying monthly payment attached to that luxury vehicle. You only see the shiny end product. This creates a deeply warped perception of what is considered a normal baseline standard of living. Your brain takes these curated, highly filtered moments of peak consumption and assumes that everyone else is living at that level 24 hours a day. This brings us to a terrifying psychological mechanism known as anchoring bias. Research from Harvard Business School has consistently shown that human beings are completely incapable of evaluating wealth in an absolute vacuum. We cannot just look at a dollar amount and decide if it is enough. We desperately need an anchor, a reference point, to determine our own financial satisfaction. The researchers discovered that people would rather earn $50,000 a year if their peers were earning $40,000 than earn $100,000 a year if their peers were earning $120,000. We care far more about relative status than absolute wealth. 50 years ago, your anchor was relatively localized. It was the neighbor across the street or the coworker in the next cubicle. The standard of living you anchored yourself to was geographically and economically constrained. But today, your anchor is not the family next door. Your anchor is a global, algorithmically curated feed of the top 1% of human experiences, beamed directly into your retinas for 4 hours a day. You are constantly anchoring your expectations to a manufactured reality that is entirely funded by corporate marketing budgets. This creates an agonizing state of cognitive dissonance. You have a deeply held belief that you are a smart, hardworking adult who deserves to enjoy the fruits of your labor. But the reality you see on your screen tells you that you are impoverished and falling behind. The psychological friction between your internal belief and your external anchor is literally painful to your brain. It creates a state of chronic, low-grade anxiety that drains your cognitive reserves and demands an immediate resolution. How does your brain resolve this cognitive dissonance? It demands that you spend money to close the gap. It convinces you that buying a premium car on a 72-month loan is not a reckless financial decision, but a necessary step to validate your social standing. It tells you that putting a lavish dinner on a credit card is the only way to prove to yourself that you are actually succeeding in life. You are not buying a product. You are buying psychological relief from the unbearable tension of feeling left behind. The entire consumer finance industry is built to accommodate this exact psychological vulnerability. They fund the illusion. They provide the frictionless, easily accessible debt that allows you to perfectly mimic the artificial anchor you see on your screens. They know that your ancient brain will prioritize the immediate appearance of social status over the invisible security of long-term wealth. They are effectively renting you a fake tribal identity at 20% interest, and you are paying it because the alternative feels like social death. You cannot willpower your way out of anchoring bias. If you are constantly staring at the anchor, your brain will eventually adapt to it and demand that you match it. Trying to consume modern social media without succumbing to lifestyle creep is exactly like walking into a casino every single day. And trying to use willpower to never pull a slot machine lever, eventually, your decision fatigue will peak, your cognitive dissonance will become too painful, and you will swipe the credit card. The system fix for this is brutal environmental curation. You have to artificially control your inputs. You must systematically unfollow, unsubscribe, and delete any source of media that triggers your anchoring bias. You have to blind yourself to the toxic comparisons. This is not about depriving yourself of entertainment. This is about protecting your financial baseline from algorithmic manipulation. You have to build thick walls around your attention to prevent the consumer economy from constantly resetting your expectations. By aggressively curating what you allow your brain to see, you intentionally lower your anchor. When you stop looking at the manufactured highlight reels, the cognitive dissonance vanishes. You stop feeling the desperate, agonizing need to spend money just to prove that you exist. You realize that true financial power is completely invisible. It does not look like a leased luxury car or a financed vacation. It looks like a quiet, automated investment account that is slowly buying back your freedom, month after month, in the background of your life. Knowing how these psychological traps work is only half the battle. You can perfectly understand mental accounting, you can recognize the signs of decision fatigue, and you can clearly see how the consumer economy manipulates your anchoring bias. But awareness alone will not make you wealthy. Your primitive brain is incredibly stubborn. In moments of stress, it will always default to its ancient programming, no matter how many books you read or podcasts you listen to. To actually win, we must remove the human element from your financial execution entirely. Let us look at the traditional budgeting model that most financial gurus preach. We are taught to receive our paycheck, pay all of our essential bills, buy our groceries, allow ourselves a tiny bit of discretionary spending, and then carefully save whatever money happens to be left over at the absolute end of the month. On paper, this sounds like a perfectly rational strategy. It appeals to our sense of order and responsibility. But in the real world, this strategy is an absolute disaster for your wealth. Why does the leftover savings method fail almost 100% of the time? Because of a concept known as Parkinson's Law, which states that a task will expand to fill the time allotted for its completion. In personal finance, this law dictates that your expenses will inevitably rise to completely consume your available income. If you leave the money sitting in your checking account for 30 days, your brain will absolutely find a way to justify spending it. There is never anything left over because your decision fatigue ensures that you will eventually surrender to a purchase. But there is an even deeper psychological barrier at play here, known as loss aversion. When your full paycheck lands in your primary checking account, your brain instantly takes psychological ownership of that entire amount. It registers that number as yours. If you wait until the end of the month to manually transfer $500 into a retirement account or an emergency fund, your brain does not view that action as building wealth. It views that action as losing $500 of spending power. Behavioral economists at the London School of Economics have studied loss aversion extensively, and their findings explain why saving money manually is so agonizing. They discovered that human beings feel the emotional pain of losing something twice as intensely as we feel the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. Your brain literally punishes you for moving your own money out of your immediate reach. You are relying on a depleted willpower reserve to willingly inflict psychological pain upon yourself every single month. It is no wonder you eventually stop doing it. Every time you log into your banking portal to manually fund your investments, you are fighting millions of years of evolutionary biology. You are asking your survival instincts to give up resources today for a theoretical benefit 30 years from now. The brain hates this transaction. It will invent any excuse it can to delay the transfer. It will tell you that the car needs new tires, or that the electric bill might be high this month, or that you should just wait until the next paycheck to be safe. This brings us to the ultimate system fix, which relies on a concept called choice architecture. You have to change the fundamental default settings of your financial environment. Right now, your default setting is to spend, and you have to use willpower to actively choose to save. We must flip that architecture completely upside down. We have to make saving the default, automatic action, and make spending the action that requires immense friction and deliberate effort. The execution of this intervention is beautifully simple. You must go directly to your human resources department or log into your employer's payroll portal. You are going to split your direct deposit before the money ever leaves your company. You dictate that 20% of your income is routed directly into an investment account or a high-yield savings account at a completely different institution. The remaining 80% goes to your normal checking account to run your life. Think about why this specific friction point is so incredibly effective. Because the investment money is severed at the source, it never hits your primary checking account. You never see the massive deposit. Because you never see it, your brain never takes psychological ownership of it. And because you never take ownership of it, you completely bypass the crushing pain of loss aversion. You are no longer losing spending power, because as far as your daily reality is concerned, that money simply never existed. The psychological relief this automation provides cannot be overstated. You no longer have to maintain an agonizing, detailed spreadsheet of every single transaction. You no longer have to beat yourself up for buying a coffee or ordering takeout. If the money is sitting in your 80% checking account, you can spend it completely guilt-free. Your future is already funded. The heavy lifting is already done. You have given yourself absolute permission to enjoy your life today because tomorrow is mathematically secured. You are effectively weaponizing the banking and corporate system's own tactics against them. Every subscription service in the world uses automation to extract money from you because they know you are too lazy or busy to cancel. They use friction to keep your money flowing into their pockets. You are simply taking that exact same psychological machinery and pointing it directly at your own net worth. You are using the power of default action to build a financial fortress. This intervention transforms the chaotic, emotional roller coaster of money management into a cold, unbreakable machine. You transition from an active, anxious participant who constantly fights their own impulses to a passive, relaxed observer of your own financial success. You stop letting your emotional state dictate your mathematical reality. And as you let this automated machine run quietly in the background, you unlock a mathematical force that will absolutely terrify you when you see how powerful it truly is. Now we have to look at the mathematical reality of these two different approaches to money. When you transition away from the willpower model and build an automated system, you unlock a force that the human brain is completely unequipped to understand. Our brains think linearly. We understand that 1 + 1 = 2, and 2 + 2 = 4. But wealth does not grow linearly. It grows geometrically. This is the compound effect, and your inability to intuitively visualize it is exactly why the financial industry is able to steal your future right out from under you. Let us compare two hypothetical people over a 30-year timeline to see exactly how this psychology plays out in the real world. We will call the first person the willpower worker and the second person the automated architect. They both make the exact same salary of $60,000 a year. They both live in the same city, face the same economic pressures, and have the exact same good intentions. But their financial environments are fundamentally different, and that difference will ultimately dictate the entire trajectory of their lives. The willpower worker relies entirely on daily discipline. They keep all of their income in a single checking account. Every day, they try to make smart choices. They try to skip the coffee. They try to pack a lunch. But because they are human, their decision fatigue peaks every Friday night. Once a week, exhausted from fighting their own desires, they give in to the illusion of action. They spend $100 they did not plan to spend on takeout, drinks, or a random online purchase, just to feel a momentary release from their financial anxiety. $100 a week does not feel like a catastrophic failure to the willpower worker. It feels like a minor, necessary indulgence to survive the modern work week. But mathematically, it is a localized disaster. That is over $5,000 a year completely lost to emotional regulation. If they put that spending on a credit card carrying 20% interest, the math becomes truly terrifying. They are not just losing $5,000. They are actively funding the bank's profit margins to the tune of thousands of extra dollars in compound interest over the next decade. Over 30 years, the willpower worker will spend roughly $150,000 just on these weekly willpower failures. That is raw capital completely vaporized by decision fatigue. And because they are constantly fighting this headwind of high-interest debt and reactionary spending, they never manage to manually save any meaningful amount of money. They reach retirement age exhausted, stressed, and entirely dependent on a system that was designed to extract their wealth from day one. Now look at the automated architect. They understood that their brain was flawed. They accepted that willpower is a biological myth, so they set up the human resources split we discussed earlier. They take 20% of their $60,000 salary, which is roughly $1,000 a month, and they have it automatically routed into a boring, low-cost index fund tracking the broader market. They never see the money hit their checking account. They completely bypass loss aversion. The automated architect lives on the remaining 80% of their income completely guilt-free. Because their future is already funded, they do not suffer from daily decision fatigue. When they buy a coffee or order takeout on a Friday night, they do not experience cognitive dissonance. They do not feel the agonizing guilt that the willpower worker feels, because their spending is safely contained within an architecture that protects their long-term net worth. They are playing a completely different emotional game. Let us look at the math of that invisible $1,000 monthly transfer over 30 years. Assuming a historically average market return of around 8%, the automated architect does not just save $360,000 in raw capital. Through the brutal, silent power of the compound effect, that money geometrically multiplies. After 3 decades of doing absolutely nothing, of never using willpower, and of never looking at their accounts, they wake up with roughly $1.4 million. This is the terrifying reality of the compound effect. It is a mathematical law that is completely indifferent to your moral character, your intentions, or your daily struggles. It simply amplifies whatever system you have put in place. If you rely on willpower, the compound effect amplifies your inevitable failures and turns them into crushing, inescapable debt. If you rely on automation, the compound effect amplifies your default state and turns it into generational wealth. The difference between the willpower worker and the automated architect is not intelligence. It is not discipline. It is not that one person is inherently better with money than the other. The difference is entirely structural. One person tried to fight millions of years of evolutionary biology using sheer mental effort. The other person recognized their biological limitations and built a machine to bypass them entirely. When you understand this math, you realize that every single day you spend manually managing your money is a day you are actively choosing to be poorer in the future. You are gambling your $1.4 million destiny on the arrogant assumption that your willpower will somehow be the exception to human biology. You have to surrender your ego. You have to admit that you are not strong enough to fight the financial industry every single day. And the moment you surrender to that reality is the exact moment you finally take control of your wealth. We have covered a massive amount of psychological ground today. You now understand that the game of money is not actually a game of mathematics at all. It is a game of neurochemistry, behavioral economics, and environmental design. For years, you have been told that your financial struggles are a moral failing. You have been told that you just need more discipline, more hustle, and more restrictive budgets. But now, you see the invisible architecture that was designed to keep you trapped in that exhausting cycle of anxiety and relief. The profound shift happens when you finally stop blaming yourself. When you understand concepts like mental accounting, decision fatigue, and cognitive dissonance, you realize that you were never broken. Your brain is simply executing a survival program that kept your ancestors alive. The credit card companies and the consumer retail industry just figured out how to hijack that ancient programming. They sold you the poison of frictionless spending, and they rented you the cure of temporary relief at a massive premium. Building wealth is not about becoming a rigid, joyless miser who denies themselves every pleasure in life. It is the exact opposite. True money management is about aligning your automated systems with your biological psychology so that you can actually live freely. It is about removing the agonizing daily friction of deciding what you can and cannot afford. When you automate your wealth building, you are fundamentally buying back your own cognitive bandwidth. You are freeing your mind to focus on your family, your career, and your actual passions. You have to abandon the idea that being good with money requires constant, active participation. The wealthy do not spend their days logging into their checking accounts and stressing over a $5 coffee. They do not rely on willpower to build their net worth. They build an architecture that makes failure mathematically impossible, and then they go live their lives. They use the exact same psychological levers that the corporations use, but they point those levers toward their own financial independence. Remember the illusion of action. You must stop confusing the busy work of managing debt with the actual progress of building assets. Wiping out a credit card balance gives you a massive spike of dopamine, but it leaves your net worth exactly where it started. Real wealth building does not give you those chemical highs. It is boring, it is silent, it happens in the background while you are sleeping. You have to train your brain to stop chasing the high of the bailout and start trusting the math of the compound effect. You also have to aggressively protect your environment from the toxic anchors of the modern economy. You cannot allow social media algorithms to dictate your baseline standard of living. If you are constantly consuming the highlight reels of the top 1%, your brain will always feel like it is drowning. It will demand that you spend money to soothe that cognitive dissonance. Curating your inputs is not just good for your mental health. It is the most important financial defense mechanism you can possibly build. When you combine these psychological shifts, everything changes. You take the 20% of your income and you hide it from yourself before it ever hits your checking account. You bypass loss aversion completely. You let the compound effect do the heavy lifting for the next 30 years. And with the 80% that remains, you live. You spend it without guilt. You buy the coffee. You take the trip. You enjoy your life today because your automated system has already guaranteed your survival tomorrow. This is what true financial peace actually feels like. It is not the sudden rush of relief when you clear a debt. It is the quiet, unbreakable confidence of knowing that your financial environment is working for you instead of against you. It is the absence of that low-grade panic that used to follow you into every single store and restaurant. You are no longer a victim of behavioral economics. You are the architect of your own reality. You have the exact same brain chemistry as every single person who is currently drowning in the consumer debt cycle. The only difference between you and them is that you now have the blueprint. You know how the trap is built, which means you know exactly how to walk right past it. Stop fighting your biology, start building your systems, and let time do the rest. If this resonated with you, drop a comment below. And if you want to understand the deeper psychology behind why we do what we do with our money, hit subscribe. This is Minecraft, where ideas become action, and action becomes your future.